Hi, everyone. I'm Ismani Michelle, NYWIFT Special Projects Associate, and welcome to NYWIFT Women Who Dare documentary screening series, part of the 2020 Creative Workshop Summit celebrating the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, granting women the right to vote, and recognizing the contributions made by women filmmakers that document creators of social, cultural, and economic change in the world. This series features 6 weeks of captivating documentary by amazing women filmmakers. The goal of this series is to show work of women documentary directors that seek to awaken a collective consciousness through their contributions to our culture, history, and the world. This screening series was created in partnership with IDA and with support from the National Endowment for the Arts. For the 4th week, we're screening Without a Whisper, and we're honored to be in conversation today with director Kachajuni Fox and Dr. Sally Rich Wagner and Louise McDonald Hearn. Today's conversation is moderated by Carrie Graber. Carrie is the past board president of NYWIFT and is currently on the advisory board. She is a documentary producer who has created broadcast documentaries and corporate communications vehicles for major corporation, government entities, and nonprofit. She founded her media company, Great Plains Production, in 2001. Her work has been broadcast on PBS, NBC, and WIV TV in Detroit. Thank you and enjoy.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm Carrie Graber. I'm very honored to be here and let us learn about another piece of unknown women's history. 2020 has been an unprecedented year in many ways, and we had really been looking forward to celebrating the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote. But what we have learned this year is that amendment really gave white women the right to vote. And the struggle for all women to have the vote is something that's ongoing. And we've also learned about the racism in that 72-year struggle from 1848. But now we're also learning a really interesting story, and that is the influence of Native American women on the origins of our story. And today we'll be speaking with the director of the documentary Without a Whisper, Kachajuni Fox, along with Mohawk clan mother Louise McDonald Hearn and Dr. Sally Rush Wagner. Kachajuni Fox has been making films since 2003 in the Mohawk territory of Akwesasne, where she resides. Her latest documentary, Without a Whisper, which we hope you all watched, we know is about the untold story of how Native American women helped inspire the struggle of the American women's suffrage movement. Louise McDonald Hearn is a condoled Bear Clan mother for the Mohawk Nation Council, and she's a trusted advisor for families and community youth and works closely with them in their homes and schools. Dr. Sally Rush Wagner is the founder and executive director of the Matilda Joslyn Gage Foundation and Center for Social Justice Dialogue in Fayetteville, New York. She is a major historian of the suffrage movement, and she's been active on the national scene during this suffrage centennial year. She's appeared on CNN, PBS. She's been quoted in the New York Times, the Washington Post, Time Magazine, and many others. And Sally and I grew up in the same small town in South Dakota, and we met each other about 16 years ago through another NYWIFT member. So we've become very good friends, and I'm very happy to have you all three here with us today. So let's get Sally, Louise Mama Bear, and Kachajuni there. So let me start out. Sally, you said in the film that you did not set out to look for the influence of the Haudenosaunee women on the women's rights movement. Tell us, how did you find the story? Where does it come from?
Well, it really comes through a woman who has connection to our hometown of Aberdeen, South Dakota. The grandmother of Matilda Gage, who lived there, was a friend of my mom's. And Matilda Joslyn Gage was the reason that I came to this information. I wanted to find how this very important suffragist had found such a transformational vision. She talks really about an end to patriarchy. She says we're in the middle of a revolution. The result of this will be the destruction of every existing institution. The result will be a transformed world. She was the third member of the triumvirate of leadership with Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. She wrote in her major work, Woman, Church, and State, about the sexual abuse of children and women by the priesthood. She wrote about sex trafficking. This is in 1893. She calls for a woman's control of her own body, equal pay for equal work. You name an issue, she's talking about it today. And she and Stanton and Anthony were really the leadership of the National Woman Suffrage Association. Oh, and by the way, she's the reason we have the 14 Oz books. She was the mother-in-law of L. Frank Baum and said, write down those stories you tell your boys. But beyond that, she really influences, I think, the vision of matriarchy that appears after the third book on is a woman ruling Oz. So my question was, how did she come to something beyond equality? Equality has got to have looked really good to these women because according to the common law, they were considered dead in the law. Once a woman married, she ceased to have any legal existence. That meant she had no right to her property, to her body. Husbands could will away unborn children. I mean, it was that bad. Had the legal right to beat their wives and rape their wives, and everything that they owned became their husbands. They had to live with their husbands. Runaway wives could be returned by the law. So how did she see something beyond just, well, it would be nice to have personhood once we marry, and into a transformed world? And that was the Haudenosaunee. And on, I don't know, the first chapter of this book, she talks about how justice never was justice more perfect, never was civilization higher. And she's talking about the Haudenosaunee.
Mhm.
Now, I have to admit something here. As a recovering racist, I think I need to do full disclosure. I didn't see that. I read I read the book. I don't know how many times. I wrote every introduction to it and all of its reprints, and I never saw those words. That was, of course, the key to where did she get her vision. The reason I didn't see it is because I had a stereotype about Native women that was 5 paces, 10 paces behind their husbands, beasts of burden. I didn't even know I thought that. But I want to say and thank, maybe publicly, my friends here who have opened their hearts to me, opened their homes to me, and opened their minds to me to educate me. This woman who had no right to that kind of generosity. But it is the Haudenosaunee. And it wasn't just Gage, it was Stanton writes about the superior position of Native women, specifically Haudenosaunee, talks about the clan mother cutting off the horns of the chief, removing the chief, having that authority when she didn't even have any political voice. Matilda Jocelyn Gage gets arrested in 1893 for voting in her own village. The same year, she is given an honorary adoption into the Wolf Clan of the Mohawk Nation. And she writes to her daughter, my clan sister, is telling me that they may consider me for a voice in the Council of Matrons. Arrested in her own nation for exercising a political voice that she should have had as a citizen of a republic based on the consent of the governed. She's considered for a political voice in her adopted nation.
And how would she have been exposed to their culture?
Oh, the newspapers. I went through 300 years. It was like, could this really be real? If this is real, why haven't other people written about it? And actually, there was someone, and it was later on. The guide for me was Paula Ganallen in The Sacred Hoop. And in it, she says, it is the loss of memory. I'm going to read you the final statement. She says, the vision that impels feminists to action was the vision of the grandmother's society. And that was, okay, you're on the right path. This is what's going on. But it was the knowledge that non-native people had, that settler colonial people had of the Haudenosaunee. I mean, they moved into an occupied area where there was, a sovereign nation or nations, all the nations of the Confederacy, and the newspapers were full of information. An old chief dies and the new one is set up, condoled. It's a newspaper article, and the assumption is that everybody knows what the condolence ceremony is. This is during Matilda Joslyn Gage's time. So the knowledge is widespread. There's personal connection. You scratch a suffragist with a vision. You look at people living in this area, and it wasn't that they were 3 people removed from a Haudenosaunee person. Matilda was invited onto Onondaga Nation for ceremony. I mean, there was close connections.
Great, thank you for that. Junie, tell us how you found out about the story, and how do you know Sally?
I actually found out about the story through Sally. So Sally presented at an education conference that I was at, teaching American history through Haudenosaunee eyes. And she started talking about this, and I was like, whoa, this is something that all of our people should know. This is something the world should know. And that was quite a while ago. And so I've known Sally since then, and Sally and Louise are good friends. Sally came to do ceremony with Louise one time and got to know her a little bit better there. And then, of course, I've been following her around for a few years, making this documentary. So we became very close.
So what was the inspiration for you internally, though, that made you decide to make a film?
I think I had that idea, after listening to Sally, I'd been thinking about it. And when I finished my last film, I was at a film festival, the American Indian Film Festival in San Francisco, and somebody asked me, what's your next film? And I just blurted this out. I was like, well, I'm going to make a film on how our women influence the women's rights movement. And so after that, I had to do it.
Always good to put yourself on the spot. Yeah. So Louise, how did you become involved in this project?
Gutchy Junie and Sally tugged at my sleeve and said, let's do this. And I never say no to these ladies because they're pretty fun to be around.
Did you know anything about this story, either of you, before Sally brought it to your attention? Was it part of your history or culture?
I don't think it was kind of any written narrative in terms of, but I think innately we know it, right, Junie? We live something that nobody else lives, and we know it, and we're just busy living what we know. That, when finally Sally, a scholar, says it, and we go, oh yeah, oh yeah, that's true. That's true. And it was just I guess the privilege and the validation that comes from the world that we live in that finally solidifies the truth. And so the more that we started to hear Sally and her research, and the more that the story started to unfold, for me, it's always like, Matilda Joslyn Gage and the writers of the day through Sally and her research gave me a lens, or a very tiny, tiny window to look back to the days of our grandmothers, to see the powerhouses that they were, and then to me explain, oh, now I know why I am the way I am, because somebody taught me how to be that way. and it becomes real. And once it's written down, it seems to be finally not fiction anymore, but kind of wavers toward truth. So for me, it was like, oh yeah, I'm glad you guys finally know that, because we already knew that. And I didn't know we had to tell anybody that. We're just living what we live, and it's pretty cool to live that way. But it's like me asking myself, what took you so long to get here?
That's the truth. What did take us so long? Sally, you have written books about the Haudenosaunee women's influence on suffrage, and how has the story been received during this anniversary year? Have people been responding in positive ways or whatever?
When I say to people, my friends, my friend Mama Bear, for example, is part of a nation and confederacy of nations where women have had political voice for 1,000 years, while we're celebrating 100 in the United States. And I think that says it all. And the thing that's been really amazing to me is the way that this story has been picked up. And you mentioned some of the places that I've talked about it. I think there's a real hunger for this information. We're facing the possibility of the end of life on the planet, and we don't have an answer. Settler colonialists, we just keep reinventing the wheel, and that keeps taking us further and further to the end of destruction. And when we're living among people who we came to live among, who have the key to survival, and the key to the importance of women's leadership, I think people are hungry to know that.
Well, wonderful that you brought it out. This is the time for us to finally start realizing that women have history that isn't part of history anymore. Her story is what we all need to tell right now. Mm-hmm. So, Katjuni, how long did you work on the film? And was it a long process, as usual, for a documentary?
This one took me over 3 years from when I started with pre-production, and I got funding through Vision Maker Media. They fund Native films, and they gave me funding for pre-production and then for production, so they followed me all the way through. And I had a great team to work with. I had a co-producer, Katja Esson, who's a well-known documentary filmmaker. Tracy Rector was one of my creative producers. Mina Magelli, my great editor. I had animators from Ganawaga and Montreal, Marion Delaron and Alex Boya, local musicians, Bear Fox, and also Jennifer Kreisberg. She's Tuscarora. So yeah, really a lot of talent on my team that pulled me through and helped me to make this film.
What was your goal? Do you think you reached the goal that you had set out when you started to film it?
We're getting there.
What is the goal then, that you haven't quite made it then?
My goal, and I talked with Sally with this, I think that our last shoot that we did, we were sitting on her back porch talking about the film, and she was talking about how, she's been being quoted in New York Times and the Washington Post talking about this, our Haudenosaunee women's influence on women's rights. And then my film was coming out, and we looked at each other and we're like, we're going to change the narrative on this so that, future generations are going to know this. And that's the goal. And I think we're on our way to doing that. The film's been getting a lot of attention. It's streaming on PBS this month. So I'm hoping a lot of youth and educators take advantage of it and watch it. So I'm hoping it becomes common knowledge. That's what I'm hoping from the film.
Well, I think it's on the way, because there was a lot of attention to it during this celebration of the 100th, recognizing the fact that this isn't just a small story. This is a major part of how we got to where we were, because as Gloria Steinem once said, women were chattel. They were owned like tables and chairs. So how did they figure out they didn't have to be that anymore? So, Louise, in the film, you say that men become leaders only through the uterine voice that says it to be so, which is such a wonderful way to describe the authority of your women. And then the film goes on to show how your culture has been deeply affected by forced assimilation and colonization. How has that impacted the women in your nation today?
Well, you know, there's a lot of undercurrents to the current situation and living conditions that we are in, and it's multi-layered in, of course, colonialism, Catholicism, government policy. There has been a lot of things that have been thrown at us in terms of trying to convert us over into civilization and to make us civilized, and yet you know, even termination policies of the United States Canadian governments, there's been a lot of hell thrown at us, and we've been greatly impacted by the residual effects, and now we're suffering the historical traumas of these genocidal acts. So we've been greatly impacted. However, you know, there's a real strong layer of resiliency that continues to refuse to accept the onslaught of colonialism. And, you know, it's kind of like a wonderful moment that we're in, and kind of a privileged moment for all of you, because, you know, historically, we're supposed to have all be gone now and not be here. But, you know, for Gudget Junie to make a film like this, and for me and Sally to be reincarnated to retell the story and become allies the way that we have is like, you know, our ancestors, our grandmas are working together to make this moment happen. And I think that we really have something important to say to the world, and it comes from a position of strength and resiliency. And there's no argument. You can't argue this story. Like, it's solidified, it's true, it's solid. It has a ancestral thread that runs really deep to the beginning of how Earth was created, and it's an undeniable existence that nobody knows. And everybody that watches the film, and to the ladies that, you know, that are on this call, you guys are standing at the door of being able to usher in a new truth. Mm-hmm. And a new change in consciousness. So it is a privileged moment that you guys are all in right now.
Thank you. Thank you. The Haudenosaunee Nation is a sovereign country still, isn't it? Or nation? Don't you still have your own passports when you travel out of the United States?
Yep, absolutely. We self-document, where we don't recognize the Canadian-US border because we predate that imaginary line. We still travel to Geneva and abroad on our own passports, and we issue our own ID cards. We name our own babies. We marry our own people. We bury our own people. We birth our babies in our territories. So we're still a fully functioning I don't want to say country, but a living civilization that far exceed its superiority in knowledge and in governance that was already pre-existing before Columbus got here.
Long time before.
Long time before.
You know, if I can just jump in, that I didn't know, and maybe everybody doesn't know, is the Confederacy, the founding of it, when it was founded, where, and the nations that came together. I wonder about somebody telling that story a little bit.
Yeah, please do.
Oh, like the founding of the. So our people were warring at one time. So the Mohawks, Oneidas, Onondaga, Cayuga, Senecas, we're all warring with each other, and then a messenger came, the peacemaker came and brought a message of peace and united all of our people together, with clan mothers being put in with chiefs to raise the chiefs. So it's a really long story. It's a really epic story. It would make a great film, like if anybody actually ever like really took the time and made a movie about that. But yeah, that's where our governance comes from, and it was something that was adapted by the United States. So the United States looked at our democracy and kind of like took some things from it and left out some really important things, like the roles of women, because it was our women that elected the leaders and or appointed the leaders, and they totally left that out. They also left out our reverence for the natural world. Like everything we do revolves around the natural world, and they're obviously not including that, and you know, their decisions that they're making today.
Well, that's putting it lightly. Yeah. So there were six different tribes. Is that what that united in to become the Confederacy of the Haudenosaunee?
6 nations, yeah.
6 nations. Okay, 6 nations. And you showed that very well on the animation or the map.
Mm-hmm.
How much land you had until the reservation system came in and reduced how much space you're allowed in. Can you still go to Canada right now, even during COVID? Are you allowed to go back and forth?
Well, the border runs right through our community. So we were here before that border. So half of our community is on the northern side and half is on the southern side. So yeah, we can still cross.
So you can still cross. Sally, how do you plan to continue spreading this information that you know about the influence on the suffrage movement? Do you have any plans for what's next about that?
A lot of talks, and we have a lot of showings of the film and discussions. I think you should make your next film. What do I know? With you saying, you know, I mean, who has made a film on the story of the Confederacy? And the thing, it's extraordinary. Arguably the oldest continuing democracy in the world. I'm in Onondaga Nation territory, and 20 minutes away from my house in Syracuse is the site of the founding 1,000 years ago of the oldest continuing democracy.
Yeah,
that's the film.
Well, your work's cut out for you already. No, last time Sally inspired you. Now here you go again. We're going to have to see where you go with that. Well, you have made other films about your culture. Can you tell us a little bit about the other films you've made?
Yeah, my other film, my first documentary was called Under the Husk, Ohelogo. And Louise was also in that film because she's one of the ones in our community very active in bringing back our rites of passage ceremony for our youth. So the film was a character-driven film. It followed my daughter and her best friend through their last year of their rites of passage. So it's a 4-year process, and they go out and they fast in the woods with no food and no water, and it really changes how they come into their being.
Wow,
it really nurtures them and humbles them. So they knew it was something that was really historic that was happening in our community with our youth, and I could see a change in our youth, and I knew I had to make a film about it. Because really, as a filmmaker, I want like 100 years from now when I'm not here, for our people to be able to look back and see us how we are, not how somebody else sees us, but how we see ourselves.
How old are they when they start that process?
I'll let Louise talk about it. Because Louise
well, in our coming of age ceremony, we begin at the onset of menstruation for the young girls and a voice change for the young boys. So around the age of 12 all the way up to the age of 18, there's an integrated system where we slowly graduate them to a 4th year fasting process, which is what Gajijuni filmed. And you know, it's a ritual of transition, taking them from childhood into adulthood, and you know, under the caring guidance of elders and our medicine people and grandparents. And it was a collective cultural effort by the community to resurrect and reconstruct an old way of being, and Gajijuni caught that on film. So that was pretty colossal and continues to be.
The Matilda Jocelyn Gage Foundation has a Gage ambassador, girl ambassadors, they're high school young women, for human rights. And Mama Bear graciously invited our girls up to meet with her and with some of the girls going through the rites of passage ceremony. And our girls were so extraordinarily inspired by that. It was like the way in which I'm inspired as an adult, their inspiration was as much, and in fact, in some ways even greater, because they saw ahead of themselves the possibility of understanding themselves in different ways, seeing the strength of these girls and the presence of them, power of them.
Well, and in your culture, it's still the women who choose the chiefs, and you continue those traditions, those 1,000-year-old or however long old they are, of you making sure that the whole society runs properly. That's still part of your culture, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a very matrifocal, matrilineal society, and everything. The norm setters are the women and the mothers and the grandmas, and it's a very it's a gynocracy, I guess you want to call it. It's very women rule kind of thing, but it's held in balance, and a man can't step into leadership until he has the voice of a woman backing him up. And she can also depose him. Like, she can nominate him, and then she can also pull him from the ranks of leadership, which why I don't understand why Trump's still in office, but no offense to anybody. But, it's like if he had a clan mother, he would have never made it to the podium.
Well, that says it all. That says it all. Well, Louise, what are your responsibilities as a clan mother? Is that something you can tell us about?
Well, it's it's pretty fundamental. It's what all mothers do. I name babies in our lawn house under my clan, my bear clan, and I also can arrange marriages. I help with wakes and funerals of leadership. I tend to the political and spiritual affairs of the nation, and I mediate in disputes, especially in marriages. I tend to the economy. So I'm pretty full spectrum here from sunrise to sunset. There's always some kind of, I'm a lawyer, bus driver, cook, and baker. Pretty much what all women do each and every day. So, I'm right now helping a litigation with a court case, and I also go to the UN and advocate for Indigenous women and maternal and child wellness. So I'm all over the place.
How did you become the clan mother? Is that passed on through family trees, or how does one become the clan mother?
I'm a third generation clan mother, so that means my mother and my grandmother were both clan mothers. Yeah. So it's a matrilineage, I guess you could say that. It's handed down through families that have a lot of daughters. Now, the chief's title can be borrowed. It doesn't have to be in your family line. Like, as long as he's in your clan, you can pull from another family line. But the women, the continuity of the title runs within families that have a lot of daughters. So I have 3 daughters and a lot of nieces. So the title will not die with me. It won't go in a grave with me. It'll continue on.
Is it all right to ask you how you would choose the next person, be it from your nieces or your daughters? Is it by age or anything?
Well, I just like the chief, it's like I can take advisement from other people in a clan, and I can take somebody can nominate somebody and I can take into consideration their nomination, but at the end I have to make the hard decision of who that's going to be. So I would base the criteria on what their how passionate they are about who we are, our culture, and how studied they are in terms of language, ceremony, political astuteness, and just being an all-rounded mother giving attention to her children. So I would look for those things, and there's a few in line, and I would look throughout my lifetime to see who was always there working with me and helping me. That would give a huge clue. Go ahead, Junie.
There's some questions in the comments. Can I answer a couple of them?
Sure, go ahead.
One of the questions is, would I be able to share the film with a high school educator in a California public high school? Right now, this month of November, PBS is streaming it for free. So if you go on the PBS site and type in Without a Whisper, you'll find my film and you can watch it. But just for this month, I think they did it because it's Native Heritage Month. So yeah, it is available. And it's a good time to watch it in November. And then somebody asked about both of the titles for the film. So my first film was called Ohilogo, Under the Husk. And Ohilogo in our language actually means under the husk. And that's what we call our rites of passage ceremony, because it's like the youth are like a corn. And then we peel back the layers of the husk as they learn more things until they're ready to reveal themselves. So that was the title of the first film. And then the second film, the Without a Whisper, came from Louise. So you heard it in the movie when she was at Seneca Falls. She was talking about how our grandmothers are written out of history without even a whisper.
Yeah.
So that's where the title of the film came from for that one.
Junie, what clan are you in? Are you on the Bear Clan?
Oh yeah, that's my clan mother over there.
Yeah. That's great. What, Sally, do you have any other books in the hopper by any chance?
Oh, I actually have one that just came out.
Oh, it's such a good book.
Oh, thank you. This was the original book, Sisters in Spirit, the Haudenosaunee Influence on Women's Rights. That's still available. But this is We Want Equal Rights, and it is the story of the Haudenosaunee influence again. But this is for young people. And I now have, actually, there's a publisher that's, it's under advisement. I'm actually doing the rewrites for a manuscript that the working title is Survival is Indigenous, and it's looking at the way in which we really have to indigenize in the West, in settler colonial, and we need to follow the indigenous model if life is going to continue on the planet. It's just sort of following and tracing the survival issues, which I identify as creation stories, birth, medicine, food, clothing, the basic essentials, and how Native people influenced settler colonialist people. And we picked that up and then lost it and then continue to pick it up, and we just have to finally get it right.
Well, I think that we have a nice comment that says, I'm struck by how, again, knowledge is power. Learning about the Native American influence on women's rights gives all women power. And I think that's a really good comment, that the example that you set, where I know Sally has often talked about it, the balance between men and women in your culture makes everybody in better shape, because there is no power over. No, the men don't have power over. You don't have power over. Everybody collaborates.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk, Junie, a little bit about how you think about extending things to the seventh generation, which is something we don't even think about what's going to happen to our children and our grandchildren, let alone going out 7 generations.
I'm also an educator. I've been teaching for over 20 years, and I'm teaching about this right now in class because all of our kids this week went on remote, so I don't even have any students in class. I'm teaching them all over Zoom, and feel kind of bad for them. So we're doing we're doing a unit on gratitude. And one of the things that for our people, the Haudenosaunee, our leaders like Louise and even our people in general, when we're making our decisions, we always think ahead to the 7th generation that isn't even here. And if you look behind me, the artwork that I have in my house, I did this artwork like years ago. That's me in the back of me. And then my mother on that side. And then if there's 2 more on this side, my grandmother and my great grandmother. And then my daughter's over here. And then there's 2 more, a grandbaby and great grandbaby on the other side. So if you live a healthy life, you'll witness those 7 generations, and the things that my grandmothers did ripple down to me, and the things that I'm doing are rippling down to the future generations that are coming. So when I'm not here, there's still going to be effects of me and Louise, hopefully, trickling down, like the work that we're doing now, like with the rites of passage. That's going to help those ones that aren't even here, and we really need to think about them. And are they going to have clean water? Are they going to have fresh food? Like all of those things, we really need to keep them in mind, like every day.
And Sally, that's part of your book, right? The book about survival as Indigenous is talking about how the rest of us can adapt some of the information that from Native culture that will help us all survive whatever the heck we're doing to the planet.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly.
Louise, in the movie, and when they took the children to these awful orphanages, or not orphanages, but to these propaganda film places or whatever, how did the language survive then? How did you guys keep the culture going when the children were being taken away and this horrible thing was done to them?
We're stubborn. Hardcore stubborn, I'm telling you, yeah. I don't know, the old people just had a solid way about them, and they had a real solid view of what creation is. And that's what really intrigues me about the work that Sally does, and about our world perspective is when I think about it, and I think about our influence on the suffering women, and then our influence on the United States Constitution. And I think why there's so much trouble right now in the world happening with democracy is that democracy is motherless. You have no mother in your democracy. There's nobody to come in and correct you. There's nobody to come in and settle you down and remind you about the priorities of life. And I had a major celestial download the other night in my in my ceremonies, and life doesn't exist without a mother. Just all living things coming to being through the vessel of a mother. And that's why democracy is gone amok, because it's adolescent boys playing adolescent games, and there's no mother. Your United States Constitution is motherless. And it's also a culture of death, because its holiday celebrates dead white guys. So, where's the life? Where, how are you going to replant life? And to me, do we have the answer to saving this planet? Yes. And it's simple. Our great law of peace is founded on a tree of peace. Trees are going to save the world. Everybody needs to go out right now and plant 100 trees wherever, in the city, on your front lawn. Well, you got nice trees, Sally, but wherever you go, you got to plant trees, because it's going to filter the air that we breathe. And I believe that COVID is a direct result of climate change. And, breathing for all of mankind is going to be even more challenging as we move along in these days and months, as we head into a very, struggling time. So, we've been warning. 25 years ago, Oren Lyons delivered a message to the world that says, if you don't change now, fossil fuels, we're going to have to pay for the air we're breathing, and look at what COVID is attacking our respiratory system. So, we can only tell, but we can't make you listen.
Yeah, that is the problem. We are not the best listeners in the world, for sure, with this culture. But you know, I like what you just said about there is no mother in the Constitution, and it struck me in the movie also when you had the picture of all the men in the Congress or whatever, and the chiefs are talking to them about, and they're asking where are the women, and they call them petticoat chiefs. The prejudice about it without understanding, and I think you're absolutely right. Sally Gage had a real talked constantly about the patriarchy that was ruling us, and tell us a little bit more about how else she would have thought about all of what we know now from Louise and Joni. How would she have reacted to this?
I think one of the things that I really was troubled by and trying to figure out, both with Gage and to a lesser extent Elizabeth Cady Stanton, they were really the two major theoreticians of the women's movement. And it was that they saw a world in balance and harmony, the potential for that. And that was what they saw with the Haudenosaunee. And I think with Louise talking about how it really, and Gage talks about in Woman, Church, and State, women have to be at the spiritual foundation, if that's the right word. Because if we look at the basic essential of life, who are the creators of life? Women and Mother Earth. And those are the patriarchy. I think Gage explains the process of patriarchy being a process of controlling that. It's if we took Marx's terms, the control of production, and we look at that in terms of what Gage is saying. She's basically saying that the control of reproduction of human life and reproduction of daily life with what we feed ourselves that sustains us and heals us from the earth, and the water that we drink, the essentials of life, that if those are under the control of males, we inevitably result in what we have now. That if women are controlling their own bodies, if women are in control of the creation of life, I think one grandmother described to me that women are the only ones sacred enough to bring forth life from the soil. And the production of corn, beans, and squash, nutritionally perfect, environmentally perfect, that was under the control of women traditionally, until the religious groups came along and said women need to be in the home and men need to be in the fields, and disrupted that process, not destroyed it, but disrupted it. That if women are in control of making the decisions, Gage wrote about war and peace, about distribution of goods. Nobody traditionally went hungry. I think the maybe one of you could talk about the one dish, one spoon.
Yeah, please.
So it's actually a wampum belt. I don't know if Louise, you want to talk about it?
You can. I can. It doesn't matter.
Well, the one dish, one spoon, the concept behind it is that the bowl is like the environment, like our earth, and that we all eat out of it with one spoon. So we're all sharing the natural resources. And one of the things that they warn about is if we start eating out of the bowl with a knife, which is what we're doing today. So if you're eating out of a bowl with a knife, it means that you're taking more than you need. You're polluting the earth, and so when you do that, you cut yourself.
Wow.
So that's what the people are doing now. They're cutting themselves because they're not taking care of the earth. You're talking about the farming practices of today, what it's doing to the earth. It's depleting the soil. We're depleting the bees. All of these things are happening around us because now a lot of people are eating out of that bowl with a knife and not being careful and just sharing and taking what they need.
Well, that's powerful. I do have a question here and for anybody, How would you go about learning the past and not history? Oral stories? How do we learn what really happened in the past and not just the history that we have been told in history books, that like George Washington cut down a cherry tree and never told a lie or whatever the heck it was?
You got to look for other histories. So that's one of the points of the film, is that, you know, like I'm a teacher, I teach in, you know, in high school, and that's what you see still, is that the history books are still one-sided. So you have to go beyond that. You have to look for other histories and include them. Even if you're just talking to somebody like Louise, or you can learn a lot, like just listening to Louise without even opening a book, you know?
Absolutely. I'll testify to that. One of the things that I think is that we assume that history is what happened. It's not. It's who tells the story.
Mm-hmm.
And we've had a dominant culture story. We've had basically a rich white guy story of their wars, their dates, their and I think that as people tell their own stories, we have a much richer knowledge of who we are. And I think that's the brilliance of this film and the wonder of listening to Mama Bear. The other thing is the resources are there. The contact narratives. I went back 300 years, and you know there's a written history. And the interesting thing is that finding that written history, it correlates with the oral history. Oral history is in many ways, I think, superior, because not in the telephone game way that we in the West have learned, because all we believe is what we see written. But when you learn to really listen and then repeat and hear it repeated and repeated, there's I in my research, I find that the oral history is often much superior to the written history, but they often correlate, you know, the possibility of finding sources that from contact early that verify exactly what Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Let me give you just one quick example. Elizabeth Cady Stanton said, "Why is it that only Christian women should suffer in childbirth?" And she's referring, of course, to the sin of Eve in Genesis, where because of her sin, she is to be under the authority of man and give birth in pain and sorrow. And what I did, I went back and found early missionary and um, the adventurers, that you know, the explorers as they're called, that had early contact, and they constantly say, why is it that these native women seem to give birth easier? So Elizabeth Cady Stanton looks at this and she goes, there must be another way we could birth. And so she practices eating natural food like native people, and she practices exercising. None of this was what white women were doing at the time. You had a month before the baby was born that you were supposed to be in seclusion, basically. And she breaks that. And Lucretia Mott writes to her and says, wow, you know, I did something similar going out right after the birth of my child, and I was called a savage for doing it. So there's this kind of dialogue that goes on that, yeah.
Well, we have a question. Martha writes, I read in Belhars that the Seneca tribe is the keeper of fire. Is that true?
No.
Okay.
The Onondagas are the central fire, so that's where all of the leadership meets. That's why they call it that. It doesn't mean that there's a fire outside burning. It's that they're the keepers of the wampum, and that's where all the traditional leaders go to meet in Onondaga still today. So that's where Louise goes when she goes to council.
And Gage wrote, where they have met since before Columbus, when she supported the Council of Chiefs, when they met in 1878 and decided that they would not accept citizenship in the United States or in the state of New York. There's a bill before the state of New York that would give citizenship to Indian men. And Gage said, look at this hypocrisy. They're trying to force citizenship on Indian men the better to steal their lands, while they're denying it to their own women citizens. And it goes on to say, justice to the Indians requires living up to the treaties that we have with them. They are sovereign nations, every bit as much as Canadians and Mexicans. And we couldn't force citizenship on Canadians or Mexicans. We can't force it on Native nations. So in the official suffrage newspaper that she was editing, she supported the chiefs in their decision at Onondaga to not accept citizenship.
Well, you're citizens now of the United States. Have you changed? Is that changed?
You can you know, under free will, you can register yourself as a citizen, but you know, most of us, you know, there's a hardcore thought that we are not citizens of the United States nor of Canada, and we're Haudenosaunee citizens of our own nationhood. And you know, to me, Sally, you know, I always throw this out there. It's a pretty provocative thought, but you know, ideally, what should have happened when saltwater people got here, because I still consider myself the host and owner of these lands, and that, you know, there's a story that's also said that when the 13 colonies started to formulate, there was a 14th one, and it was supposed to be the Haudenosaunee, but that gets lost throughout the narrative through the course of time. And also that I tell people who are unhappy with their democracy to rescind their citizenship and take shelter underneath a Indian nation. And I'm waiting for Sally to give up her U.S. citizenship, and she's gonna come under the Bear Clan and under the nation someday.
You better watch out if that's an invitation. Come January 20th, you might have a whole influx of us.
Of people, you know, I wonder if, like, some Native people who do accept the citizenship that was placed on placed on Native people with the Indian Citizenship Act of 1923, that they are dual citizens. So I wonder if I could be a dual citizen of the Mohawk Nation and the United States.
Well, I
We'll talk about it, huh?
Sally, you can do whatever you want.
So we have a comment from Mark who says that the University of Alberta is offering a free online class right now called Indigenous Canada, and he just finished it. So that might be an interesting course. Joni, do you have recommendations of books that you teach to your students that show them other parts of history that we might be able to tell people about?
I don't use many books in my class. I use my Uncle Tom's book. It's called And Grandma Said. That's a good book, actually, to read if you want to learn more about our people. It's called And Grandma Said, and it's by Tom Porter, who's my uncle, my mother's brother. That's one of the books we use in class. I used to use Last Standing Woman by Winona LaDuke. I love that book, too. I mean, we use Sally's book, Sisters in Spirit, because most of the stuff that I teach for Native Studies is for Haudenosaunee. So most of that's oral teachings, and I invite a lot of people into the classroom, like Louisa spoken in the class. They're actually both coming to be guest speakers for this month, Louise and Sally, so they'll be speaking at our school via Zoom. But
I also have a book called A Clan Mother's Call, and it talks a little bit about who we are, where we are, and what we do. So A Clan Mother's Call, put out by SUNY Press. I co-authored it with Jeanette Rodriguez out of Seattle University.
Mm-hmm. Juni, can you tell again what your uncle's book was? My Grandma Said?
And Grandma Said.
And Grandma Said, okay. And he, his name was Tom
Porter.
Porter. putting these in the chat room right now.
Oh, good. Okay. Yeah, that'd be great. So people were looking for resources. We have about, well, you know what? I quickly have to tell, this is the end of what we have, because I have to tell the very end. So thank you very much, everybody. I was fantastic. We got great comments. I really appreciate it. Please join us next week for week 5 of the NYWIFT Women Who Dared screening series with the documentary Truth to Power. Barbara Lee Speaks for Me. It will be followed by a Q&A with director Abby Ginsburg next Monday, November 20th at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. For more information, go to NYWIFT.org events. That's NYWIFT.org events. Again, thank you very much. It was so great to talk to you all. Appreciate it greatly. And onward with the work. We have a lot of work to do. Thank you.
Yes,